Hello, I'm Simon Harris. In December 2014, I delivered 2 3-day project management courses at the Princess Nora University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. When I summarised the first course, the guys on it said it would be good to have a video of that. So we videoed the same section of the second course. Sound quality is pretty good for what was in-class recording. The second class then said, hey, your flip charts would be good as slides. So the flip charts and slides are also available, and I'll put the URL at various places, like at the end of the video. The contents of the video is a summary of the steps to planning and tracking a project, as well as the tools and techniques that are relevant to each step. It's 15 minutes recapping 15 hours of shared group work in exercises and our class discussions about how to do PM. At this stage we had discussed that a PM's job is to build shared understanding. First with the customer about what is wanted, and then second with the team about how it is to be delivered. We'd covered all the steps and tools and techniques of planning, and were preparing to cover the steps of tracking and reporting.
Where does it all start? If we're going to do a project, what's the first thing to think about? Would it be, this is a bit of a clue here, my stakeholders? And when we think about stakeholders, when we engage with stakeholders, we're asking about needs and wants. Yeah, we're trying to get the requirements, and what we get here are expectations. And expectations may be unstated, and they may be contradictory. So the tool that I use, the one that we spent some time looking at the other day, is the goal statement. And my intention with producing a goal statement is to identify the end state, and we use terms like SMART for acceptance criteria. And what can we say about acceptance criteria? If expectations can be unstated and contradictory, what should acceptance criteria be? Measurable,
simple, measurable, agreed, achievable.
Agreed, achievable, defined, and one that's not in SMART, which is important because everybody has expectations and wants. One of the things that we want to put over here is prioritised. And as we move through with tools like goal statement, what was the other tool that we used in project speak rather than business analyst or technical analyst speak? What was the other tool that we used to help us to understand scope? 3 letters, begins in W. We used the WBS, and we said that the WBS should start by being deliverable, end state, deliverable oriented. And when we do that, we should be able to link our deliverables to our QMS. What's a QMS?
Quality management.
To our quality management system. So now we're specifying product standards. So we want to go and buy a PC, for example. We specify that it's going to run Windows 8.1 and it's going to have 0.5 terabyte of disk space. So we have a product standard. And this conversation here is largely customer. The customer might not tell us what the disk space needs to be, but the customer should be telling us what it is they want. And then after we'd had the conversation with the customer about the deliverables, what was the test for we had a good enough definition in the work breakdown structure of the deliverables? The customer, when we ask another question of detail, says, I don't understand the question or I don't care about the answer. In which case we may have to do some explanation just to make sure we have reached the boundary of what they care about.
Is it a dictionary?
And we record this information here in a dictionary. But we haven't, that's not everything we're going to record in the dictionary. We then start talking to the team about, well, what is it we talk to the team about? If we know the deliverables, what is it we want to know from the team? We want to know how they're going to approach the problem, so we want the activities or tasks. And these should link to our quality management system, because now we get things like standard procedures, standard work instructions, standard methods, operating instructions. And now we have everything linked back to the quality management system. When we have the activities, there were three things that we talked about doing. One of them was determining the dependencies. What were the other two? Can you remember?
Duration. Time of the
Yeah, the duration, the cost, etc. So we actually talked about a topic begins with E.
sources.
Begins with E, resources.
If
We did the estimating, and actually we tried to estimate effort, and we considered the resources, so you were right to say E, even though that's not the one that begins with E. And if we divide effort or estimate by resource, productivity and availability, we get duration. And if we multiply duration by resource cost, we get costs. And if we combine dependencies and durations, we get schedule. And if we combine schedule and costs, we get time phased budget. And now we have our baseline. Are we okay with that? Does that link the bits together? What did we talk about when we talked about risk yesterday? What did we say risk was? Uncertainty. An event that's uncertain, that if it occurs, will have an impact on our baseline, either in terms of the quality or quantity that the customer gets, or the time or cost.
Either positive.
And it can be positive or negative. So we start thinking about risk up here in terms of the risk to either the goal or the deliverables, and that might say that we want to take some action to make the project more safe or to capitalise on the opportunities. So we might end up with extra deliverables or extra elements of work in the baseline in order to accommodate the risk. So in these resources and these estimates and these dependencies and this schedule and these costs, and therefore this budget, will be allowance for our risk. There will be the stuff that's guaranteed because it's about changing probability. So we've selected those actions to take because we're trying to affect the probability. And there will be the stuff that's contingent and will only get used if the risk occurs. So now we have a fully risked, we also need to talk about any risk to the activities, which might then lead to further elements of activity. But now we have a fully risked schedule. Still okay? And I think we could say we've put all the pieces together now. There is one other little bit of conversation we had yesterday that we should add on here, which is I said to you, when you do estimating, the first set of estimates can be quick and low precision. Because it's when we know from the dependencies and the durations, the schedule's critical path, now we can say where, second time through, it's worth producing high precision because we know it's going to affect schedule. And it's also now that we'll be able to understand where the major cost drivers for the project are. And so again, we might redo some estimating with greater precision because it is the items with the most significance to the cost. Let's have a look at that picture, if you're okay with that picture. Let's have a look at that picture from a different angle. Imagine driving through a city, and then imagine climbing into a helicopter. You're still looking at the same territory or landscape, but when you look at it from different perspectives, we get a different view. The first thing that we were developing here was the scope. And when we talked about the content of a plan here, we said that the scope is actually shown in schedule terms on the left-hand side. So if I was to draw an expression of a work breakdown structure as an indented list against a timeline, I think I've got a better back pen. I might say, here's a task, here's a task, here's a task, and here's my earliest delivery date. And here's some contingencies or allowances for uncertainty, perhaps part of my 3-point estimating's best case, worst case, and here's a delivery date that's worst case. And if I then, so I'm just repeating the conversations that we had yesterday. If I look across the time frames, I can now say, how much resource do I spend in this period? How much resource do I spend in this period? How much in this period? How much in this period? This period, this period, and they were supposed to be the same width. And now I can ask the question, what's my budget look like? What does my cumulative expenditure look like? So there is my expected expenditure for my known knowns. That's all the work we've got to do to deliver the product and manage the project, plus the risk actions we've already committed to taking. So there's a final cost, but I've actually got a cost that's up here. So now here is my cost contingency for my risks, and here is my schedule contingency. So I now have a baseline drawn in terms of either money terms or percent term, complete terms, or staff hours. I can use any of these units on this axis here. And this expresses the amount of work to be done in the project, and this expresses the time frame the project is going to operate under, and I've also got my contingencies shown, and my contingencies here I can link back to the allowances that we included in the plan that were there because of the risks. They'll be recorded in my risk register as to why they're there, and they'll be recorded in my baseline plan as the actions I'm going to take. Now when the project goes into execution, this task will start being performed, and then this one. So I will now, as of a certain date, be able to mark how much of this work have I finished. And if we're at this date in the project, but I've done this much work, I'll be able to say, wow, look, I've done more work in this time frame, than was expected. I'm ahead of schedule. And I'll also be able to ask the question, perhaps if I go into my finance colleagues, and say, how much money have I spent? And maybe I've spent this much money. In which case, now, and here's something that we might need to talk about more than once, I can now say I'm under budget. Notice I've spent more than my cash flow had predicted, but I've achieved even more than the expenditure. So this project's actually under budget because it's achieved more for the money that was spent than had been originally expected. So now the steps we went through yesterday and the day before have built me a basis to be in control. And the measurement that we're going to talk about next is going to provide me with the information to do an analysis. And when I do that analysis, it's going to give me 2 pieces of data. And the 2 pieces of data are going to be the difference between what we've achieved and what we've paid for it. And we're going to call that cost variance. And it's going to give us the difference between what we've achieved and what we expected to achieve by now. And I just heard somebody say it.
Schedule variance.
And that's the schedule variance. And if I, instead of subtracting them, as I'm doing in this picture, if I divide them by each other, I get the performance indexes, or I get the efficiency at which the project is running. Are we okay? What questions might we have about... I've disappeared. Here we go. So there's the planning processes, and they're really all about producing the blue line on the other page. The blue line on the other page is then our basis for control. Are we okay with all that? Did that put all of it into context for you?
Yes, we have lab and non-lab control. Augmentation in the middle would be.
Yeah. The only thing we haven't shown here is all the technical work for implementation, because we don't know, have we got engineers digging foundations and pouring concrete? Have we got technicians building engines and fuel tanks and training astronauts, or have we got developers writing websites and installing networking? We don't know. So that bit that isn't included in here, but the building baseline and then tracking back against it is in these 2 pictures. So at least one of us is okay. What about the rest? Any questions? Mohammed, you're looking as though that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take the push on.
Both of you. Mohammed and Mohammed. Okay, great. Well, we've finished the day really now, because that's everything. I mean, that's the whole course in 2 sheets of paper. I'm going to send that off now. That was the bit that they wanted last week.